Hey, so today I'm just going to go over some Lua scripting for Neovim plugin development. Just some options you can go over using the standard library and then using the Vim function API. So really quick, let's go here. So I just have these three files. I have my io demo, my jobstart demo, and then just a testing zig file. And in the next video I'll go over some of the applications of these. For making a little plugin, making some functions, just streamlining your workflow, kind of getting comfy in Neovim, learning how to script on it, because I think that's probably the goal if you're using it, other than just using it to code, but to have fun, learn a little bit, and really make it your own. So going into io demo first, we have a handler. We use popen, which I think is pretty open, but I'm not 100% sure. We have a reader, which we just pass the output into. And we have this if statement just as a null check, and just to show it goes here, we can get the numbers, the whole file, the line without the end, or the line with the end. But for this purpose, we want the whole file. And to go on a little bit of a tangent, what I've noticed is that this can be a bit finicky with some commands, which will lead you into job start. But for introduction into kind of running these shell commands, using the output in Neovim, I'd strongly suggest just playing around with I/O, especially if you want to just do Lua scripting for other stuff, maybe automate some tasks you have, get comfortable with the language as or before you start writing some plugins with Lua. So let me just save this and then source this file. %so sources it. And what I really like about Neovim is this is just a regular Lua file. I could even just say print here and it would still work. Or it'd still give me some feedback in Neovim. So it really is a first-class language. It really feels like you're just scripting, and then you can use these functions, which I really like. I'd say it's echoes of what you have in Emacs, not quite as integrated, but it's the next best thing in a much lighter, tidier package. So let me see here. So here we see it's frozen for 5 seconds because I have sleep, and then we get that match. And that's one of the issues with this, is it is blocking. So you could run into some problems with performance, or where it's kind of freezing everything up and you can't do too much. But I feel like the blocking with this is not as bad as the blocking with jobstart, and I'll expand on that because jobstart is asynchronous by default, but you can make it synchronous, and that's where I've experienced some problems with that. So just to show what it's like when you don't have a sleep function, it's pretty quick if you're using simple commands. You're not doing anything too in-depth where you're worried the command might fail, or if you know the output doesn't work, then I'd switch to jobstart. So if I go back here, so here I have this running asynchronously, and one of the problems I had is that this would run and I would try to change the state of some variable outside the scope of the function that handles data, and it wouldn't change, and I wasn't quite sure why, because there's no like keyword async like with JavaScript. So I was kind of wondering, why isn't this working? Is it a problem with the API? Am I not using it correctly? And it was just so complicated. There was so much stuff that I was kind of scared away and used IO at first, but out of necessity came back, started reading the docs, and just playing around with it. The docs helped, but the main thing was just testing stuff out. So here, if I save this, source it, and run demo, see file not changed. 5 seconds later, we'll get match. But the one thing that I forgot to show while you do that is the whole time I can move my cursor around. So it's not blocking, I can still do stuff, get the output back, perfect. The only part that makes this tricky, where I wasn't realizing that it was asynchronous, is these calls are happening super quickly. I'm not having a sleep for 5 seconds or something, so I'm having something that I feel is almost instant, and I wasn't thinking enough to think, any kind of external call you make has to be asynchronous. So here, if you saw it flash really quickly, we have file not changed, testing.zig. So it's one of those things where you get these weird effects that you can't really capture unless you know what to look for. And part of the reason I'm making this video is to hopefully elucidate this process, these functions. I really love TJ DeVries' series with Go, where he uses jobstart and he does a lot of stuff with testing that motivated pretty much all of my plugin development because I saw how accessible it was with Lua, but I still did get hung up. It took me a long time, a lot of trial and error, and if I wasn't so stubborn, I probably would have given up. So I just hope that, in some way this might help with people that are in that same exact position. So here, one thing that's interesting about this is this makes it blocking. So now that I do this, we'll see that I get both of those guys right there. The one problem with this that I found when I was writing my plugin is that, let's say, everything's nice, it's happening almost instantaneously. So, as long as you're not actively moving the cursor, typing a command at the time that the command runs, you'll see that output. But what if the command takes a little bit? Forgot to source it. So if the command takes a little bit, then you move your key once, and it clears out that output coming back. So I'd say that's the main thing here is, you're moving your key around, it's running, but you're not getting that output that you want. It's taking a while, and here we go. Sorry, forgot to run the command. So here I'm moving the keys around. Once I get those messages, they're going to disappear immediately because I pressed a key, which is what makes messages go away. So it's one of those things where you're kind of inching closer to this goal. And then finally what I found is probably just the best bet is moving any logic down in the scope of the on standard out. Trying to have side effects is great, but when you're dealing with external shell commands where you want to make sure that you're not freezing or crashing something, it makes a lot more sense to use jobstart and just fully understand it. But it's not something you have to do for most cases. But if you're writing a plugin that you want other people to use or that deals with some complicated commands, I'd strongly suggest learning it. But a great stepping stone is io.popen, job wait, and then finally, once you feel comfortable, jobstart. So I'd say the last thing I want to cover is the standard out buffer and standard error buffer. So when I was writing this Zig plugin that allows you to run tests interactively, I tried initially with io.popen, but you get output from standard error, which is not usually what you'd expect, so it would cause that to hang, which would cause weird visual glitches inside the editor, like I'd move down and all the text would change. So I went to job wait, job start. I was getting that working. Everything seemed pretty good. I was spitting out all the errors from standard out. And in case something was coming from standard error, I was appending it with something like this, where I had a table that would take values from standard out and standard error. And what I found is that only standard error was producing output. So I was basically kind of biting the bullet, making it synchronous, having it freeze and risking losing the messages by moving, just to ensure that I was getting standard out and standard error. Once I realized it was just standard error, I switched all the logic to be in standard out and standard error. So worst case scenario, I get 2 prompt messages versus having a message that you have to not touch the keyboard at all to receive, and you just have to wait and sit there. So it's one of those things where you just kind of shave off a layer of resistance until you get the functionality that you want. Overall, I really like Lua. I hope to make some basic algorithm tutorials. I just want to kind of push more Lua content on YouTube. And just in general, it's a great language, great text editor. The only downside is when you Google Lua on YouTube or these other platforms, the main results are, should you learn it, not how to learn it, stuff like that. So, hopefully this helps. I'll post some stuff in the future on how to make plugins and then just base Lua in general. Maybe some scripting stuff. I'll think of some little things I do throughout the day that get annoying, and I'll try to automate those. But that's it for today. Hope that helped.